Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on religious equality in the workplace. Before I get to the presentation, I would like to introduce myself to you. My name is Angelica Quiñones, and I am currently the Associate Director for Resident Ministry at the University of San Francisco. What that job entails is I lead a group of 11 wonderfully talented graduate students who want to lend their time to help undergraduate students really walk the journey of college. And they provide pastoral assistance, but they are also role models. They provide university resources, and they are really some guides, I would say, on the journey for many of our undergrads, many of whom are away from home. Now, this year is a little bit different because of COVID-19. We are going to have a virtual fall semester. So my resident ministry team will be working virtually to build community with students. As challenging as that might be, they are definitely wonderful people and ready for that challenge. I also happen to be a doctoral student at the University of Southern California, working on my doctorate in education. And particularly, I am working on a dissertation that is focused on the sense of belonging and inclusivity experienced by students from minoritized religious traditions at Jesuit Catholic universities. It is a personal passion of mine as we see the number of Christian students decline at Catholic universities, and we see a rise in the number of students that are coming from other religious traditions as well as no religious traditions, what we call nons. It's interesting to see how and many of the religiously affiliated universities are making changes to be more inclusive, and changes to what they offer and to the programming they have for students in order to make students that are non-Christian feel welcome on campus. I also come to you with a master's degree in theology and education, and in the interest of full disclosure, as I go through this presentation, I am a practicing Catholic, but very much with an eye towards interfaith and understanding how it is that we can engage in meaningful and productive dialogue among different faith traditions, to really build stronger communities, and in our case here in the United States, a stronger nation. So, just a little bit about what we're going to go through today. I will define a few terms for you so you know with what terms I'm working with. Tell you a little bit about religions in the United States, and talk a little bit about the First Amendment and Civil Rights Act of 1964. Talk a little bit about Christian privilege, which may cause a slight degree of discomfort, but anytime we talk about the word privilege of any kind, that is what it does. But that has to do sometimes with a lack of awareness that we do carry some privilege. Next, I'll talk a little bit about inequality in the workplace, and then how can we create spaces of welcome. So, definitions. What do we mean when we talk about religious equality? In order to answer that question, let's talk about two very specific terms, which are religion and spirituality. So, religion you can define as a unified set of beliefs and practices agreed upon by a number of people or a group of people. Now, these beliefs can stem from uh, answers to questions such as what initiated the world to be, what is our origin, what is nature, what is the purpose of the universe, where do we go when we die, what is the meaning of life, what is the meaning of a human being on earth, as well as many traditions involve devotionals and ritual observances. I know the faith tradition to which I belong, which is Catholicism, is replete with ritual observances and devotional practices, as are many of the major religions. These traditions often contain a moral code that govern the contact of human affairs, and that's basically a code of ethics, if you will. Now, spirituality is another term. And spirituality, very simply defined, is an intimate connection with something greater than yourself. And it can be found in and outside of formal religious tradition. So many people say, I am spiritual, but not religious. And that is absolutely possible. You can find spirituality in nature. You can find a sense of spirituality with the music if you feel that connects you with something bigger than yourself. You can find spirituality in the work that you do. And that is a very personal, individual thing. And it can be apart from religion, but it can also be very much a part of religion. Spirituality, in terms of religion, is that core of connection. It's one thing to go through the rituals and practices, but then if you are someone who is religious, you ask yourself, why is it that you are doing it? Is it out of a sense of duty, right? Or is it that you feel a sense of connection with something completely outside of yourself? And that's when we talk about religion and spirituality being very intimately connected. Now, for this presentation, we're talking mostly about religion, because religion is often what we see, something that's very tangible, sometimes because of the clothes people wear, sometimes because of artifacts someone might wear. Sometimes it's because you can see someone worship at a place of worship, where spirituality is very personal oftentimes. And that's something that is readily seen or readily brought into the forefront of who you are as a person while you are at work. Meaning, you might have your own sense of spirituality, but the spirituality doesn't necessarily come with rules or a code, if you will, that religion does. And it's those rules and codes that sometimes are what is questioned, or what requires accommodation in the workplace. But just know that for many people, both are intimately connected, and for some, it's one or the other. So let's define religious equality. Religious equality refers to the equal treatment of all religions, traditions, and their denominations without discrimination. That means if you are talking about Buddhism, talking about Christianity, Islam, if you're talking about Judaism or the Baha'i faith, you are talking about them on equal terms. I also want to make clear that when we talk about religious equality in this presentation, we are talking about the experience of people that come from various religious traditions. I am not making a judgment, nor leading us to a path of making any kind of judgment about what those rules or practices within these traditions entail. Instead, the goal is to try to see each of these traditions as equal. Obviously, they're not practicing the same things, they don't have the same beliefs, but equal in the way that they should be treated in the workplace, or in some of your cases, maybe at schools. So that's what we're talking about. So, in order to move on to talk about religious equality in the workplace in the United States, it's necessary for me to kind of tell you where we are in terms of the percentages of people from different religious traditions. So, what is our religious landscape in the United States? So, in this slide, you can see two pictures here, and let me move this a little so picture is out of your way. I don't know if you can see that, but I just try to move my face off the screen a little bit. What you see here on your left is a chart from Pew Research Forum. Pew Research Center, that estimates that the population of Muslims around the world will overtake the population of all the other major religions by the year 2060. As you can see, it's estimated that there would be a 70% growth in Muslims, a 34% growth in Christians, 27% growth in Hindus, 15% growth in Jews, and then so on and so on, with a negative number for Buddhists as that population is decreasing. Now, those are worldwide percentages. Now, how does that affect the United States? Well, the United States, since about the 1940s, has been seeing an influx in people from religions outside of Christianity. So we are talking about groupings of folks from East Asian religions, from the Islamic world, as well as an influx of folks from Judaism coming to the United States. In the 1960s, we saw a higher population, of course, of Asian traditions coming to the United States. So the once very Christian nation that the United States was is vastly changed. And what you can see on the right side is that Protestants and Catholics are shrinking in the US population. And the subsets of nones, or those who practice nothing in particular, have no tradition, is growing. So the percentage of adults who identify as Protestant based on religious landscape surveys from the year 2007 onward, we see that the population has shifted from 51% to 47% of Protestants, with Catholics going from 24% to 20% at a 4% decrease. And those with nothing in particular are growing from 12% to 16%. This is significant, of course, because we are seeing a dip in those traditions, a rise in those who do not practice, and we're part of that we are part of that worldwide trend where the percentage of other religious traditions is rising. And this next chart will show you here. So we're looking at the averages from 2003 to 2017. And I believe another study should come out later this year. But if you look at it, in 2003, the average of Protestants in the United States, based on this ABC Washington Post poll, is about 50% Protestants and 22% Catholics, which gives a total of 83% Christians. That has gone down, and we're talking about 2017, which is about 3 years ago. So Protestants are now at 36%, remain at 22%, but you see that there is a growth in other Christians, a 3% growth of other Christians. Those are denominations that do not fall into the Catholic or Protestant category. And then there is a significant growth in those with no religion and a 1% growth in those with another religion outside of Christianity. So the populations have definitely shifted. And you see that while the populations of other none and other Christians has risen, the population of traditional Christians, Protestants and Catholics, has definitely dipped. So what does that mean, right? That means that the religious diversity in the United States is growing, much like the cultural and ethnic diversity is growing. And we talk about cultural and ethnic diversity all the time. And in some ways, that's very intimately connected with religious diversity. But we also need to pay attention to religious diversity and what that means for us. And what that means is that there are people that are entering our workforce with very particular religious beliefs, with certain traditions and certain customs. And just like we will respect someone from another culture, so too someone from another religious tradition deserves to be respected and afforded the same protections within the workplace. So, does anything ensure religious equality? And the answer is yes. It's supposed to, right? So we'll start a little bit before I talk about the First Amendment, but we'll talk about the Declaration of Independence, which talked about inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you take a look at religion, that is part of life. Liberty for some in terms of freedom of expression and the pursuit of happiness. Religion is where a lot of people find comfort. They find solace, they find joy, and they find community. And so some would argue that even the Declaration of Independence back in 1776 also guaranteed that there would be some sort of religious equality. That's not really cemented until the First Amendment, which is part of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. And so in the First Amendment, which many are familiar with, of course, it states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So the First Amendment ensured that the government would not meddle with religion, and religion would not meddle with the government. Now, we can have all kinds of arguments of how that has gone since this was written, but that's how we're here today. We are here today to talk about religious equality. And the First Amendment tells us that there would be no prohibition of the free exercise thereof of religion. So that is a protection given by the law of the United States. And so the question then becomes, did this ensure religious equality? Well, it should have. But questions were still on the table. So you have to remember, when the Bill of Rights was drafted, the majority of people in this nation were still very Christian. So you had Christians writing a bill that protected the free exercise of religion. But at that time, the free exercise of religion really meant that you had Protestants and you had a small group of Catholics, and it started ensuring the rights for both of them to freely practice. Right. And at the time, even Catholics struggled with that because they were often seen as non-Christians by the Protestant founding members of the society. And so they too were often faced with situations where they were not treated as equal. But the Bill of Rights ensure that a little bit more for them. And even though at some point they were lower in the hierarchy of Christian traditions here in the nation, they are now a respected religious tradition, and this ensured it. Now, 1964, the Civil Rights Act came into play. And the Civil Rights Act, of course, said that segregation was banned. Segregation based on race, religion, or national origin was banned in places of public accommodation. And you see that they are listed there. And it says that the act also barred race, religious beliefs, national origin, gender discrimination by employers and labor unions. And the equal employment opportunity was born for that purpose. And just to dig in a little deeper, it was actually Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that said, and this is straight from the U.S. Department of Labor, it prohibits federal agencies from discriminating against employees or applicants for employment because of their religious beliefs in hiring, firing, and other terms and conditions of employment. Additionally, Title VII requires federal agencies to reasonably accommodate the religious beliefs or practices of employees or applicants, unless doing so would impose an undue hardship upon the agency. So reasonable accommodation. So what are those things? If we're talking about education, there are a few reasonable accommodations. For example, when I was a high school student, I had students, when I was a high school teacher, I'm a student now, but when I was a high school teacher, I had students who were Jewish and had to take some holidays off. And oftentimes that would interfere with maybe midterms or finals. And the reasonable accommodation there would be that I would either have them take those assessments before they had to take time off or after they had to take time off. And in the case of other types of assignments, perhaps it was an extension or so for them. For Muslim students as well, now that now that I work at a university, for Muslim students, reasonable accommodations are things like providing a space on campus for prayer, also recognizing the dietary rules during the month of Ramadan and being able to have accommodations for that in terms of exams, in terms of having the cafeteria open at later hours, in terms of having space available for celebrations. So these are reasonable accommodations. For myself as a practicing Catholic, when I have not worked at religious institutions, there are reasonable accommodations for me to take something like Good Friday off, or even take time off on Good Friday to go to church, or Ash Wednesday, for example, to go to church. So those are examples of accommodations, and that's part of what Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protects. And again, the key word is reasonable accommodation, right? But it is the burden of the employer to find that accommodation, and it is the burden of the employee to make sure that they are reasonably letting their employer know that they need time off or they need this accommodation, and they do so in a timely manner. And it's really about working in that partnership. Now, again, talking about something controversial, and this is sometimes a barrier to whether or not people feel welcomed in the workplace or even in school. So we're going to talk about Christian privilege. And often this can be very uncomfortable for folks who are Christian. And again, I want to remind you that I am too, and I am a practicing Catholic. And so this is also a topic that is difficult for me, but one that I try to be aware of in all spaces that I'm in, really. Just like as a woman of color, right? I'm aware of how privilege has affected me, or other privileges that I carry may affect other folks. So what is Christian privilege? Christian privilege refers to the conscious and subconscious benefits or advantages granted to Christians over non-Christians. Now, in the United States, and this can happen in other places in the world for sure, but in the United States, Christian privilege runs rampant in so much of our structures, and some are governmental structures, some of our educational structures, some are workplace structures, some of it is the language that we use, some of it are actions that we undertake, and then there are day-to-day things that grant those of us who are Christians privileges that we're not aware of at all. And then some of us also benefit from Christian privilege without even being Christian, and not really recognizing how that is. But for individuals from other religious traditions, it is something that does affect them. So, for example, I mentioned earlier that if I were to ask for time off to go to Ash Wednesday Mass or to go to Good Friday Mass, more often than not, the employers will will recognize it and say yes, right? It's not always as easy, right, for someone who is of a different tradition to say, I have a day that's very important to my faith and I need to take a time off. And a lot of it has to do also with a lack of understanding and a lack of religious literacy in this country. I won't get into that so much, but a lot of what I will talk about in terms of Christian privilege can be mitigated if we had more of an awareness and an understanding of other religious traditions. So here are some examples of Christian privilege in the US. Now, I put the list up for you. I won't read all of them necessarily, but the first one there, I can expect to have time off work to celebrate religious holidays. Second is music and television programs pertaining to my religion's holidays are readily accessible. And we can see this every year. I know here in San Francisco, we have one radio station that begins playing Christmas music from October onward, and sometimes well into January. I know the Hallmark Channel has their very extensive list of holiday movies in December, and I think they actually start in November. I know that there are parades on television that, though not outwardly Christian necessarily, do have some elements. So the Christmas parade, even if they call it a holiday parade and Santa Claus appears, it is a religion that there is a religion that is represented by that, right? Number 3 talks about it's easy to find stores that carry items pertaining to the practice of your faith's religious holidays, and that's true, right? We see Christmas trees and Christmas wreaths, and we see holly and ivy, right? Occasionally some stores will celebrate other traditions and you'll see dreidels and you'll see menorahs, but for the most part, that section is small, right? But you have an entire section at a store like Target of Christmas goodies and Christmas treats, as well as Christmas cards, right? The greeting card industry has made so much money off of Christmas. Number 4 is an important one that we should talk about. I am not pressured to celebrate holidays from another faith that may conflict with my religious values. So this begs the question of, the rightness, the correctness of having Christmas parties, right? I know that the institution that I work for, because it is a Catholic institution, the word Christmas is often said, but we're also very mindful that we have employees and we have students that do not celebrate Christmas. So we have a holiday party. But even there is a question, well, what holiday party? What holiday are you celebrating? So many workplaces have taken to calling a lot of those celebrations just end of the year celebrations, or opportunities for an end of the year celebration where folks can talk a little bit about the diversity that's there. So you have some workplaces, which I've been to in the past as well, that celebrate Christmas, but also talk about the very, very rich traditions of Judaism, and also other winter traditions from other faith traditions are brought to the forefront to really talk about. Number 6, I can worship freely without fear of violence or threats. Post 9/11, there was a great deal of anti-Muslim bigotry here in the United States. So much so that I remember here in the Bay Area and in California, stones were thrown at groups of people that were thought to be Muslim, who were actually Sikh, and they were confused for being Muslim. But in any case, you had 2 traditions that were suddenly targeted, right? In other countries, there is violence, and there are threats made against Christians who are minorities over there. But here in the United States, it's mostly those traditions that are outside of Christianity that are often targeted. Number 8, you can practice your religious customs without being questioned, mocked, or inhibited. And for many of us who are Christians, who, whether we outwardly practice or not, that's not something that we face quite often. But I do know that it does happen to people that practice other religious traditions. People are mocked for what they wear. I know that, again, post 9/11, women who wore the hijab often felt like they could not wear it in public for fear of being ridiculed, for fear of being beaten or killed, or even for fear of being told that they were oppressed. Now, that's another act of privilege, right? To look at what someone else is wearing for another tradition and believe that is oppressive for them, when in many ways it's just their outward expression of their inward faith, and to them it's very important. Number 10, when swearing an oath, I will place my hand on a religious scripture pertaining to my faith. That's not something we always think about, but most courts have a Bible, and a request needs to be made if another scriptural book needs to be used, and sometimes it takes longer than it should to make that a possibility. There are number 17, my faith is accepted, supported at my workplace. Right? Is it respected? Is it supportive? Are people being welcoming? If someone, let's say, is a Muslim and takes part of their lunch break to pray in an empty room, is that welcomed? How is that seen? Is it respected? Is it appreciated? Or is it something that is otherized? That's another question. Number 19, I can travel to any part of the country, know my religion will be accepted, and I will be safe, and will have access to religious spaces to practice my faith. And that's not always a possibility. Here's the rest of the list. And some of these are, about public spaces and private spaces and education. So one of them here is number 32. My faith is taught or offered as a course at most public institutions. Now, many people forget that public institutions of higher learning also teach about religious traditions, right? But that choice often comes down to the different departments and the academic provosts, what is offered and what isn't. And so sometimes it's very important for people of faith to see that they are represented there, right? Like if it is one of the major religions, chances are it'll probably be covered. But if you are someone from a lesser known tradition like Zoroastrianism or the Baha'i faith, or even some traditions that practice ancestral rituals and practices, and are they represented in some way, shape, or form in those courses? Number 33, I can complain about my religion being under attack without it being perceived as an attack on another religion, right? And that is a privilege that Christianity carries. Because oftentimes people who practice Christianity, and again, I mean, under that Christian umbrella, are Protestants, are Catholics, or other Christians. Oftentimes, if we say that we are being attacked, we're not often perceived as attacking necessarily another religious tradition. But the opposite is not is not true. If someone from another faith, let's say Islam, and this happened after 9/11, if they came out and they said that they were being attacked, then right away you had people saying, well, no, you're not, we're being attacked. And, they would blame everything on them. Right. And that's not fair. So it's concerning that in this country where there should be freedom, there are still examples where there isn't, where people are still very, very scared to practice what they believe because of how it'll be perceived. But a lot has to do with the privilege of this nation as a so-called Christian nation, and what that means. And oftentimes that kind of mentality leads to a dismissal of what we are in this nation, which is absolutely pluralistic when it comes to religious traditions. So here's what a lack of awareness does, right? So a lack of awareness of Christian privilege can lead to the following, right? If you're aware of Christian privilege, then you're aware of the need to be inclusive, to help others feel like they belong, to help others feel welcomed, and to create those safe spaces. But a lack of that awareness can lead to things that we outwardly do, or that we internalize, and then bring out as a microaggression, for example. So discrimination is treating someone unfairly because of their religion. So it can be anything from not hiring someone to firing someone, to not allowing a person on your team because this person comes from a different tradition that you quite don't understand. Lack of inclusion, so otherizing someone who's non-Christian. Insensitivity, a lack of concern for others. And this can manifest in several ways in the workplace, from inappropriate jokes to perhaps knowing that you have someone in your workplace or in your school who is Jewish, who is Muslim, and you decide that you are going to order something that is prohibited by dietary restrictions in those two faith traditions. There is also oppression, which is unjust treatment. Deculturalization, which is a process by which an ethnic or religious group is forced to break from their culture, from their traditions, from their customs, from their language. We see this historically with many groups of people. Native Americans are one. You see a loss of indigenous culture, of indigenous language, of indigenous spirituality, because there was that deculturalization. Deflection. Deflection is the idea that, well, this isn't about me. This is how it has always been, and they need to get used to it. It's that mindset of, this is a Christian nation. They have come here. Christians are the majority. They need to just get over it, and that's the way it is. And that's deflecting and not totally being aware of the reality of, hey, this is a pluralistic society, and it's not someone who comes here who needs to change what they believe in and what they follow, but maybe the need to change needs to come from you, to want to learn how to accept, to want to learn about the beauty of these traditions, to want to learn how to create a welcoming space where that colleague, that student, that friend feels like they can be authentically who they are. So how can we create an equitable workplace? So consider the language used in the workplace, right? There is language that can be discriminatory all around. There can be certain terms or phrases that might be used that might be insensitive to another group of people, specifically a religious group of people. Consider the events that you celebrate. So, maybe your workplace is a place that has a Christmas party, and maybe not everyone in your workplace is Christian. So try to learn, what religions are represented in your workplace, and maybe change the name of an event, or the focus of the event, and still have an amazing celebration where you can celebrate your achievements as a team, celebrate your community, and celebrate in a big way, but not necessarily having a focus on a particular tradition. Attempt to learn before asking, right? The burden should not be on one person or a group of people. So this is very important. This goes back to that aspect of religious literacy. It is important to learn about the different traditions, but the impetus should not be on the person representing the tradition, which means if you have one person who is Buddhist at your workplace, it is not that person's responsibility, nor the burden that they should carry to have to teach your entire workplace about Buddhism. If I were the only Catholic in my workplace, I should not be the only person who is responsible for educating that workplace about Catholicism. If someone is Muslim, it should not be that person's burden to necessarily have to teach everyone about Islam. It should be everyone's desire to want to learn. And that's how it should be about cultures, about different traditions and customs. It's like if you travel to another country and you wanted to learn about their customs, you might pick up a book and read about it. How much more meaningful, right, would it be to pick up a book about different world traditions and learn the basics? And I'm not saying don't ask, right, someone about their traditions, but ask as a matter of clarification. But it's that much more appreciated when someone comes to you and asks questions for clarification than expecting you to say everything about the religious tradition to you, right? That expectation that they're the ones that are going to teach you about the tradition puts a burden on that person, right? And it's always more heartfelt if you've gone ahead and done some of the research and come and clarify. It shows that you care about the person. It shows that you give them their dignity and their place. Remember that religious diversity is here. It adds to who we are. Just like racial and ethnic diversity, religious diversity adds to who we are, and it adds to the workplace. Again, ask for clarifications, and clarifications in terms of beliefs, clarifications in terms of dietary restrictions. You could even ask for clarifications on what they may need or what accommodations they may need. Work with those employees on accommodations. Or students, if you happen to be in the educational sector. Celebrate each other and learn from each other, right? Celebrate differences, celebrate similarities, learn about differences, learn about similarities, learn from each other and about each other. Don't make assumptions. And this is super important. So, again, going back to the post 9/11 world, I had a friend in college, and she wore her hijab very proudly as a practicing young Muslim woman. But assumptions were made very, very early on in her college career by some classmates about oppression, and did she feel oppressed, and how could she do that if she wanted to be a free woman, and this was a rule that wasn't allowing her to be herself. And the fact is, it was definitely allowing her to be herself. That is who she wanted to be, and that is how she wanted to practice. And for her, it was absolutely freeing to wear the hijab. So don't make assumptions about what people wear, they choose to wear, about if they choose to keep kosher or they choose not to keep kosher. I have Jewish friends that keep kosher. I have some that don't keep kosher. I know Catholics that will do meatless Fridays year round. Some will do meatless Fridays during Lent, and some will continue to sneak in those hamburgers on Fridays. So don't make assumptions. It's also important to know that no two people are alike. Just like different people are on different ends of the political spectrum, so too different people are on different ends of the religious spectrum, which means some will be very traditional and conservative, some will be liberal, some will be moderate, some will be in between. But it is about, a lot of the times, the individual and how they choose to practice within that religious framework. Provide spaces of welcome, right? If you are lucky enough to have a lot of space wherever you work, you might want to set aside a room maybe for meditation, for prayer, a utility room that can be used for different functions, but that might allow those in your workplace to have a quiet space to nourish their faith and to nourish their spirit, right? I know where I work, even though it's a Catholic institution, we have a meditation room that is often used by students and faculty and staff from a number of religious traditions and denominations within those traditions. Everything from, afternoon prayer to kindness meditations to just regular prayer. And so provide those safe spaces if you can. But other safe spaces is your workplace as a whole. If someone is from minoritized tradition, if they walk into your workplace, do they feel like they are seen as an oddity, or are they welcomed fully as who they are? I think all of us as human beings want to walk into a space and be recognized 100% for who we are, for the identities we carry, for our self-expression. We want to be authentic, and that's part of providing that safe space. What else can you do? So schools and workplaces should hold trainings on diversity, very mindful to include religious diversity and specifically address religious accommodations, develop policies that honor diversity and outline processes for religious accommodation. That is super, super important. Well, that brings us to the end of this presentation. I hope that it's been informative. There is so much more on this topic that I can talk to you about, but I have a limited time frame, and in this virtual space, there's no way we can create a bazillion slides. So thank you very much. If you have questions, if you want to talk further, if you're interested for whatever reason, the research that I'm doing, you can contact me at my USC email, which is anquinin@usc.edu. And with that, I want to thank all of you for stopping by, and I want to thank the creators of this virtual summit for the invitation to present to you today. I wish you well. I wish you health. I wish you joy. And I hope the rest of your year is better than the first half. And I wish that for all of us. Thank you so much.